I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. As a reminder, this is the Biotech Talent Development webinar. In this particular one, we'll focus on the path of CSO and VP of R&D. I'm Chris Heery. I'm the moderator of today's panel discussion. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Arcellx. The goal of today's webinar is to highlight the career paths of 3 successful scientific leaders in biotech and pharma. What we hope is that we'll get some practical advice on strategies to help early career professionals seeking a career in biotech, and then help them land the position that might fit them best within industry. We understand that a number of our attendees may be suffering through what is the amount of flux in the job market related to some changes in the scientific world these days. And so we understand there's a need for some of the practical advice around what does it look like to make a transition from academia or government into other areas where your skill set may be useful. So we hope we will accomplish some of those today. And then just as a reminder, please, if you have questions, use the Q&A function on the Zoom. If you put it in the chat, it's harder to manage, so please use the Q&A function. It helps us keep those organized. So this will be a 1-hour webinar. And so what I'm going to do is first ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we will have each of the panelists give a 5 to 10 minute review of their career to this point and how they got to where they are. We'll go in alphabetical order. So I'll start with you, Dr. Gabrilovich.
Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Dmitry Gabrilovich, and my official position is Executive Director and Chief Scientist in Cancer Immunology of AstraZeneca. I am located in Gaithersburg, Maryland.
Hi, I'm Priti Hegde. I head global research at Kite Pharma. Ira?
Oh, you skipped from H to M quickly. I'm Ira Mellman. I'm recently ex-Genentech, where I was Vice President of Cancer Immunology, and now am CSO of a new startup called Medici Therapeutics.
Great, thank you all for the quick intros. And so now I'll ask each of you to give a longer version of your background, and we'll start again with Dr. Gabrilovich.
All right. So I am a lifelong academician. I spent, oh my goodness, more than 35 years in that job. I was trained in immunology at Imperial College in London. I moved to postdoctoral position to UT Southwestern in Dallas, then in junior faculty, research faculty at Vanderbilt. Got my first faculty position at Loyola University, and it's in Chicago, and then spent 13 years at H.L. Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida, growing to the rank to professor and get the chair position there. And then moved in 2013 to Wistar Institute and also with faculty position at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And then I joined AstraZeneca about 5 years ago to my current position. So basically, my journey was very typical in academia until 5 years ago. And I have a lab, NIH-funded lab, and my major focus was in tumor microenvironment, myeloid cells, and so on. I did translational work as well, not only basic research, and I did communicate with quite a few different companies. I was on the advisory board for several companies. Advise them on myeloid cell targeting and all other associated microenvironment issues. So kind of learn a little bit how companies working. Usually it was either big biotech or pharma. When opportunity presents itself, I just jump into this kind of new new opportunities, let's say new ideas, and try to figure this out. It turned out to be better than I thought. I was prepared for much worse, but it's overall turned out to be incredibly educational and enriched environment for me. Learn a lot of interesting things. My position is a little bit unique because we continue doing discovery research, publish papers and so on, and together also we are involved in support of drug development. However, exposure is enormous to all different aspects of big pharma activities. So I'm happy to discuss different areas of interest for you, but let's pretty much try to stay within very short time limit and not to overextend it. That's okay, Chris? Need to say more, or that's enough?
That's perfect. You're always welcome to say more. Everyone's tuned in to hear what you have to say. So, but if you feel like that's a good place to stop, we'll go to Dr. Hegde.
All right. So unlike Ira and Dmitry, who've had extensive and brilliant academic careers, after my PhD and my postdoc, I joined industry right away. My first job was at GSK. And this was during the time of the Human Genome Sequencing Project. And I had the opportunity to work on human genetics while I was at GSK. Oftentimes they talk about a career ladder, but you can also have a snakes and ladders. And that was essentially what my career journey looked like. I transitioned from a bench scientist to a leadership role at GSK and then had to move out West Coast sometime in 2005 for family reasons. And I started my career all over again from a bench side, getting back to a bench scientist at Genentech. And it's okay to do that. If you know what you want to do, then pursue your passion. I don't think titles matter as much. You can gain titles as your career goes on. It's a marathon. While I was at Genentech, I spent about 17 years of my career at Genentech, and I met the wonderful Ira Mellman, who was a sponsor for me in many ways at Genentech. And I had the opportunity there. The reason why I transitioned back to a junior scientist level was I wanted to make a change in my career track from being a pharmacogeneticist to translational medicine. And I had no experience in translational medicine. So I said, let's start all over again from scientist level 1. And that was a really good decision. The thing about translational medicine is you have one foot in development and the other foot in research. And so you really get the ability to see drug development all the way from target discovery to launch, if you're lucky, right? If you worked on programs that are now commercially available, you get to see the whole gamut of drug discovery and drug development. So it's a great place to be in for scientists. I had the opportunity and partnered with Ira on really understanding human tumor immunology and what makes T cells in humans react to tumor cells and kill tumor cells. And I spent most of my last 2010s in that space. I then had the opportunity to moved to Foundation Medicine, which was a diagnostic company. It is still a diagnostic company within the Roche family. I joined Foundation Medicine as Chief Scientific Officer. I was doing that for 4 years, commuted back and forth between the West Coast and the East Coast. And a year and a half ago, joined Kite as their head of research.
Great, thank you. Dr. Mellman?
Nice to see you, Priti.
Nice to see you too.
As Priti's already said, I began my career rather conventionally in an academic setting. So for many years, I was professor and department chairman and scientific director of the Cancer Center at Yale University School of Medicine in wonderful New Haven, Connecticut. There, I actually had also gone to school there, and looking back, I realized that even the research I was doing as a student had a decidedly translational aspect to it. Unknowingly, I just thought it was an interesting scientific problem to try and solve the genetic disease cluster that we were working on. But then got interested in immunology and cell biology, took appropriate training to learn that area at Rockefeller University with Ralph Steinman, who some of you may know was the person who discovered dendritic cells. took all that information back to New Haven, began a lab which grew to quite a large one in size. I think by the end of my time there were maybe 25, 30 people in the laboratory doing a range of topics, all kind of concentrated on trying to understand what the cellular basis of the immune response was. How did you actually fire up a T cell response? And I think during that period of time, towards the end, a great number of people, both family members and friends, and as well as people in the laboratory even, my lab manager and chief electron microscopist, both contracted or diagnosed with ovarian cancer in one case and GBM in the other case, and realized that as the field of cancer immunology and immunotherapy was just starting, this is now in the late 2000s, there was an opportunity to actually do something about it. And although obviously I would not be able to help these particular group of friends and family members, it afforded the opportunity to, by moving to industry, to actually do something that actually might benefit people and not just study how all of these things might work. And as I often say, the only model for human cancer is human cancer. And in the academic setting, it's actually very difficult to do, certainly then and even now, to do the types of human-oriented discovery research that I think all of us on this call believe that we need to do. In order to really make progress and discover the right types of drugs and medicines and the right groups of patients that we need to be treating with those drugs and medicine. So in 2007, I picked up and moved to Genentech in South San Francisco. First was put as head of all of oncology. And I think they were rather surprised to find out what I really wanted to do was cancer immunotherapy, which was kind of a struggle in those days because even in the mid to late 2000s, not too many in the oncology establishment, including my own colleagues there, were either very cognizant of or supportive of the idea of trying to drug the immune system to outsource the work of generating anti-cancer activities in patients. Took about 3 years since I got there to actually get this group going, but eventually it turned out to be quite successful. And in research, we were able to put together, I think, a very large group of maybe 70, 80 to 100 people working in this area, and then started attracting brilliant enthusiasts such as Priti in from other groups. And we had this remarkable, and I think unprecedented at the time at Genentech Roche, cross-functional group of individuals that stretched everywhere, all the way from basic scientists to people in the commercial organization. We met weekly, we discussed problems, we discussed how the field should be oriented and what we would be able to do about it. And I think that decade of work was probably, and I hope you agree, Priti, was like probably one of the most exciting times I've ever had scientifically and from a development point of view, because you really felt that with that incredible team there, you were able to not only have an idea, get input from others, but then actually come up with a plan to execute that idea in patients and in clinical trials, and then also do something else, which at the time was unprecedented: capture the data from these patients, get biopsies, learn and develop the analytical techniques that were going to be required to actually figure out how these patients were responding, and learn. Trying to put together a whole field, which just a few years earlier simply did not exist. So there's been terrific success in that field, as I'm sure many of you know. I think last year alone, maybe $70 billion of revenue was generated for the pharmaceutical industry as a consequence of the aggregate of checkpoint inhibitors and other related types of modalities. But now I think the science has kind of caught up or has not yet caught up, I should say, with the drug development aspect of it. And now it's hard. So the checkpoint inhibitors, that pembrolizumabs and other anti-PD-1 and PD-L1 drugs kind of fell out of the sky without really very much long-term thinking. Now I'm noting that pharma really doesn't know what, with one perhaps exception in the case of AZ, they really are not as committed as they need to be to drive the field forward. And so I think that what will happen, or what is happening now, is innovation in this area, filling out our understanding of the field and the mechanistic basis of all of this, which we really need to know in order to make further progress on the drug discovery angle, is being outsourced, as it were, to academia, to the NIH, and most importantly, I think, to biotech. And I say most importantly, not only because biotech is, I think, very well positioned to be able to do this type of work and resource the type of work, but with the absolute disaster that's taking place now in public science as a consequence of decisions being made in Washington, I think we really need to put our eggs in a different basket disproportionately for the next period of time, until we can somehow ride this out. So when Genentech decided that this was too difficult to do, they didn't know what the next direction was going to be. We hadn't come up with the next PD-1 inhibitor. They decided to disband my department. So I left, and am now well along the way of starting a new company, I think aptly called Medici, because what we're looking for now is trying to create a renaissance in the field to take it to the next step and to the next level. But it's going to be hard, and it's going to take a lot of work, but that's okay, because we already know that when you get it right, the payoff is unprecedented for patients, and insofar as the investment community is concerned, it's also unprecedented with respect to the financial and commercial potential that's associated with a truly effective therapeutic modality such as cancer immunotherapy. So I'm still very hot on the field. I think we just have to be a little bit more flexible in terms of how we execute now moving forward. And that obviously is going to affect everybody's career choices and job choices if this is the area that you're interested in.
Thank you so much. That's an awesome overview from the three of you to give us sort of not just your own stories, but sort of how the field has gotten to where we are and what some of those gaps are. Because I think as people are considering this job market, thinking about a transition into industry, having a sense of what they're getting into and where the field may be going is also really important. So can maybe just to start out, because I'm going to try to synthesize the questions in the Q&A into aggregate questions, so we try to get the most of these answered. So maybe could I start with, and I think this question may be best addressed to Dr. Hegde, that transition as a relatively junior academic researcher into industry and what that path looks like. What are some of the challenges, things that were surprising, things that were more fun or different? And then for Dr. Gabrilovich and Dr. Mellman, and this is really nice because Dr. Mellman can talk about how that related observing Dr. Hegde and how how does that mentorship role then look from the leadership position? Obviously, Dr. Hegde can comment on that now as well. So if we could kind of touch on those themes, you don't have to answer any of the specific things I just said, but just if we could start with those ideas, and maybe we start with Dr. Hegde, and then we can go to whomever wants to answer after that.
Yeah. I think, if you want to enter into industry, getting your foot in the door somehow is critically important. Within industry, biotech and pharma have very different flavors. Let me just call that out. In biotech, you get to do a lot of different things because they're small companies, you wear multiple hats. In big pharma, you tend to require domain area expertise, vertical knowledge, because there's just a lot of people around you who will fill in the gaps for the things that you don't know. So having access to a biotech job versus a pharma job are actually different in flavor. I joined pharma at the time when I was looking for opportunities. Biotech as a field in general didn't exist like it does today. It was mostly pharma. One of the things that I was fortunate that I joined at a time when the transition to genetics and human genomics was big, and I rode that wave. Companies were looking for people with skills that I had as a postdoc, and that allowed me to get an opportunity and a foot in the door in pharma. So, I think it's key for you if you're looking for a job to understand what are the hot spaces and how do I tailor my resume to that hot space and speak to that hot space. Even if you do not have direct experience in it, speaking to it in terms of how you can contribute to that space is critically important. And I saw some questions in the Q&A that you're a computational biologist, you want to get into clinical development. You can do that. I mean, biostats is quantitative mathematics. You can apply your skills as a computational biologist for clinical development as a biostatistician, as an example. So try to look for what the hot spaces are and tailor your resume accordingly. Once you enter into industry, particularly in big pharma, you're a drop in the ocean. You really rapidly need to figure out who's doing what are the key objectives of the company, what is the company focused on, and make sure that whatever you're doing is tailored towards what the priorities of the company are. And I found that to be really important at every step of my job in industry. At Genentech, when the transition occurred from, I joined Genentech in the anti-angiogenesis space because Avastin was a big thing. The study of what drives anti-angiogenesis was a big thing at the time. But when the transition occurred in oncology from angiogenesis to cancer immunology, I was really fortunate to have the ability to ride that wave. And Ira really helped me here and got me a seat at the table at that time. But it was also because I had the ability early on to build those relationships and that network at Genentech. You need to keep your ear to the ground to understand what's going on and figure out where you need to best position yourself so that you can get access to resources. In pharma, at the end of the day, resources are critically important. If you're working on a thing that's important to the company, you get resources. If you're not, it's very hard to get your job done. So make it easier on yourself and find opportunities that are tailored to the priorities of the company. Those are my 2 cents.
I can comment on Priti's point because she's correct completely. Biotech and big pharma is 2 extremely different things. They both have substantial advantages and serious problems. And individuals need to decide what is better suit them. Biotech, with some exception, obviously, but what I observed for multiple meetings and discussions, biotech a little bit closer to typical academic lab settings. They allow you to explore more. They allow you to focus on more research activities. And that's great. And usually they pay better. But problem is you are very heavily, well, with some exception of big biotech, you heavily focus on 1 or 2 drugs, which is part of the original concept. If for some reason it doesn't work, you're out. And it could happen very quickly. So it means that you need to decide where you are in your spirit. Big pharma is different. It's indeed a drop in the bucket, like Priti said. You're part of the huge team. You're losing your identity in a way that you're part of the team, and nobody will know you until you make yourself known after very extensive effort. So, but you have exposure to multiple different group of scientists. Some of them are absolutely brilliant in different unrelated areas to you, like chemistry to biologics, clinical science, all sorts of things. You can learn much more. And you have stability, because usually if the project is not working out, most cases you will be relocated within the company to do other project. Sometimes, or more often, within the same function, the same department. So this is the pluses, but minus is that how much individuality you want to pursue, how much you want to own what you do. In biotech, it's definitely possible. In big pharma, it's much more difficult. So it's all, there's no. I have a question. I believe I saw the questions. What is the better, academia or industry? There is no answer to that, because industry has a clear advantages, but industry has a lot of issues, and I already mentioned a couple of them, but it's much more than that. Structure, the total control in the vertical activities, so it's much more than in academia. In industry, postdoc does not tell a PI whether he or she wants to do this research or not. Academic lab, you have a lot of negotiations. You need to convince postdoc to do that. However, in academia, you have much more freedom. You have opportunity to do something you like. So that's a benefit of it. But stability, of course, it's different in other things. In industry, you have in big pharma, in academia, much less so. So everyone needs to decide for themselves what is better. There's no simple answer to that question, which is in the chat. What is better? What is more rewarding? There's no such thing. They all have pluses and minuses, or maybe challenges. Let's put it this way. You can summarize, Ira.
Well, there's not an awful lot to add. I think, as I referred to earlier, the academic side now is undergoing a period of uncertainty that didn't exist just fairly recently, and it's difficult to make any recommendations or even provide, I think, any rational advice in terms of what it is anyone should do. Just because of the funding situation, I think has changed and is changing, and nobody really knows where it will end up. So everything that Dmitry said about academia is in principle true and has been true up until now. But I think there are now more challenges that kind of make it more difficult to predict what a career in academia is going to look like. Which is kind of one reason why I was favoring industry in my comments earlier. Now, in industry, as I think was briefly alluded to, but I think what is important to really stress is that there's an enormous range of job opportunities, particularly in large pharmaceutical companies. In other words, you don't have to continue being a laboratory scientist or a computational scientist that's involved in discovery activities similar to that which you had done during your training or during your current career in academia. But there are ways to take scientific backgrounds and plug them into everything from planning and analysis of clinical trials and clinical trial data, commercial analysis, business analysis, doing business deals and collaborations with other companies where having good scientific insight is essential to allow a particular company, both biotech and pharma, to make a good deal that actually will be useful and productive from a development and scientific point of view, as well as from a financial point of view for both ends. So there's many different ways to be able to apply scientific education and scientific thinking. But for a lot of these things, it means a significant career change. We've all grown up pretty much to be laboratory scientists or trained in the clinic. And as soon as you step across the divide into the private sector, in the industrial sector, you may give that up. And as Priti was able to do, you can still come back, but often that's difficult to do if you've resided in the more operational, programmatic, or commercial side for too long. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because my experience has been that those people who do that actually love it. So, for example, Genentech also had or has a rather active postdoc program. I didn't have 30 postdocs, I had 5 or 6. And like of the most recent group, one took a job at the University of Washington, but the others are all going probably into industry. And several of the recent postdocs have gone to become clinical scientists or gone to become biomarker scientists, meaning that they're not doing work that they initiate and want to do per se, but are working on projects and programs that the company needs done, and you get involved and you help. And again, I don't mean for a moment to make that sound like a bad thing, because I firmly believe as a scientist, we all should be able to get in and get interested in anything as long as it's a good problem, because it's the process that matters as much as the actual nature of the problem itself, as long as we know enough to be able to contribute to that problem. So I think the watchword is flexibility. Challenge yourself to kind of break out of your own mold, and consider other types of jobs that will make use productively of a scientific education, whether or not that opportunity is going to emerge in a large pharmaceutical industry with all the provisos that Dmitry has already mentioned, or in a smaller biotech company, which is much more like a Wild West cast your troubles to the wind kind of attitude. Personally, although I started a company while I was at Yale, this is the first time I'm ever actually deep in the weeds of actually getting one going. And I have to say, it's super exciting. You don't know if you're going to succeed. You don't know if you're going to fail, but you develop a vision and you get behind it. And hopefully you don't drink your own Kool-Aid, so that you can still keep a rational sense as to what's good and what's bad.
I just want to put a plug in here for industry postdocs. Gilead has them, Genentech has them, I think AZ has them, AstraZeneca has them as well. Great way to get a foot in the door in industry, great way to understand how industry works. There are also internship positions for PhDs in most of these companies. If you're going through, around 3rd year of your PhD onwards, look for summer internships. They look for PhDs. That's another way for you to get a sense, whether it's in clinical or in adjacent disciplines, you'll get a sense for what it's like to work in those. So certainly look out for those.
Yeah, that's a great point, Priti, because I used to think it was just, well, people think you were at a company and therefore they'll hire you because you have experience from them. But I think as important as that, you get a better sense as to what actually goes on. You're doing your, depending on the postdoctoral program, some are very flexible, like at Genentech, where at least in the past, you've been able to more or less select the project you want to work on as if you were in academia. But you're surrounded by people who are doing all of these other sorts of jobs that we've been describing, and you get a sense as to what they are and realize that, gee, these are not that bad. And I could get into this, I could do this, and I could make an impact. So I think it's valuable from that point of view as well. So putting your foot in the door is not just that you can move to become a scientist there or elsewhere, but also that you can educate yourself in a way that none of us will be able to do sitting here lecturing at you as to what all these other job opportunities actually are.
Yeah. I have 2 postdocs in my group now. AstraZeneca has indeed postdoctoral program. Is incredibly competitive for us. It's basically grant writing. I write the grant, try to get this position to be funded. But it's really great way in, because 3 years you will have a chance to explore not only the research activities in the team, in the lab, but also to see what's going on in the company. And for instance, AstraZeneca does not allow postdocs to work on pipeline projects for obvious reasons. So it means that you will do a lot of exploratory research work. You publish papers, that will be your actually output. That's the main requirement. High profile paper, preferably. So it's a really great way in. It's competitive. It's not that many positions usually funded every year, but it's definitely a possibility. And as Priti said, that we do have a half a dozen companies which fund postdocs. So this is, I couldn't agree more that that's the great way to start if you are not sure what you're doing, because you still can come back. You're doing 3 years postdoc with a good team, with a good publication, publish 1 or 2 papers out of it, and you still can go back to academia if you're really inclined to. So it's a really nice way to go.
I think you've all touched on this a bit, and I don't want to over-index on the question, but I do want to make sure it's addressed. Could you maybe comment on what the advantages of having a PhD plus or minus a postdoc, or whether a PhD is absolutely necessary, et cetera, in the field? What advantages does that convey? What trade-offs do you see? And are there attributes that maybe you associate with someone with a PhD, for instance, but the lack of that attribute can't be overridden by the fact that they have a PhD? So, you know, if somebody has these attributes, they may be more valuable than someone even with advanced training, for instance. Could we
I can take it because I tried to answer these questions in the chat because it's easy to me to answer in the big pharma. Yes, I would very much recommend to get to pursue PhD if you're thinking about this line of work in big pharma, at least. I don't know biotech. I didn't never work in biotech directly. Because yes, you can be getting senior scientist position without PhD after 5-6 years of fantastic work, but eventually you will hit the glass ceiling if you are in research and development part of business. If it's you are doing just business part, that probably is different. But if we're talking about research and development, how we call it R&D, without PhD, it will be difficult to go far high if your career goal is that. If you're really thinking to have a reliable job and doing stuff and not to worry about tomorrow, yeah, I would say that you can skip that. But other than that, my personal view is better to get PhD.
Yeah, you know, it does also add to one's aggregate experience and I think sense of maturity about science if you know do your dissertation project and then have responsibility to do another one. And I would say, you know, from my experience in a larger company, getting a position as a scientist, in an independent group leader, maybe I would be better to call it, having a postdoc is almost essential. Candidates were generally not competitive except in extraordinary circumstances. In small biotech and startups, it's much less important. I think there's it's certainly not a requirement. And you know, I've seen many people move successfully directly from their PhD, or they start a postdoc and leave after a year after somebody offers them an interesting position at an exciting new startup. So, and these guys do quite well, or they don't do any worse than the ones who did do a postdoc. So it's okay. Again, it's, you know, the issue of flexibility. And again, as Dmitry says, if you're not going to be a group leader, it may not matter so much to do a postdoc. It's not going to help you so much for the new type of job description. I noticed there were a couple of questions in the chat on whether or not, if you have no PhD at all, does that create kind of a glass ceiling for you? And certainly I would say that that's the case these days on the research discovery side, but it's not the case on the more development commercial side. You don't need it. What you need to be able to do is be smart and understand the task at hand and make waves, sell yourself, as you know, precisely as Priti said a couple of comments ago.
I'll just add to it is I have seen people with master's degrees enter R&D, spend a couple of years, and then transition outside R&D to either medical affairs or commercial organizations, and then get an MBA on the dime of the company. Like companies will sponsor employees to go out and get MBAs just a master's alone will only get you this far, but go ahead and take advantage of the fact that the company will pay for your MBA and go and get a part-time MBA. And people do that a lot in pharma, particularly folks who either have just a master's or just a PhD with no postdoc. Transitioning out of R&D it helps to get an MBA if you transition out of R&D.
Yeah, there are some questions around transitioning into clinical and translational as well. So maybe I'll take a high level view of this and ask you all to comment as well. In clinical development, which is what I lead for my company, we have PhDs, we have non-PhDs, we have obviously non-medical people as well. So there are ample opportunities within things like clinical operations, to use a PhD and the educational background that you may have, although the skill set is significantly different than probably what you would have done in your PhD. And similarly, medical writing, which is something most PhDs have done quite a bit of, scientific writing, which is very, very similar, can be used both for publications, presentations, but it can also be used for regulatory purposes. Regulatory writing is a major expense and resource that we use in industry, because we are trying to piece together a lot of regulatory documents throughout programs. There are many, many updates that happen throughout the life cycle of a program, and it's a great opportunity to use your background skill set. And then, there are things like biometrics, data management, statistics, things like that. I've also noticed questions about AI and computational biology, et cetera. There are sort of unlimited job opportunities if you have that skill set and background in industry, I would say right now, and that's only growing. And I'd love for the panelists to comment on this, but we are seeing sort of overwhelming financial interest from investors in investing in artificial intelligence to help with drug discovery and tools that will reduce the overall cost of drug discovery. So I'm going to pause there and ask the panelists to comment on some of those things and see if we can check off some of these questions, because I know there are quite a few on this topic.
I can comment right away, because I have people who are trying to transit from R&D to clinical, and I know how clinical work. I would totally agree with Chris. I mean, this is definitely a possibility. People, in my 5 years, were half a dozen people who I know personally, who works in different levels, from associate directors and directors, moving from R&D to clinical scientist positions. So it's definitely a great path forward. The only thing is, it's entirely different type of job, very different kind of activities, different from R&D type, even development, much less discovery. So people needs to understand, and usually company explain to you that what it is, because it's entirely different skill set and entirely different type of activities. And regarding AI, AI is a big deal. It's very important to use. What in AstraZeneca is try to achieve is that people who are using R&D, they use AI very aggressively. We have to take a very deep training. We have to use it in our everyday life. We have our own chat GPTs, which is not connected to the web because, of course, of privacy issues, IPs. And that's very, very important. However, I would be a little bit cautious about what type of job is open, like AI development. That kind of, it's not like an enormous amount of this particular activities available. So we use AI very actively, and we'll continue to use even more and need support, but it's not more like AI development. That's a little bit different type of job, and it's more like IT job. And this will be a different type of people, I guess, who would need it in this position. Anyway, but it's a future. AI is a future, and it's definitely make life easier. I just use AI tools almost every day myself.
Can I just add a couple of things here? If you are you enjoy process, project management is a place for you. There's a lot of companies, whether it's in small biotech or large pharma, where they need people who can move programs from one stage to another, whether it's in clinical, whether it's in development, whether it's in research or in commercial. Project management is a place where people who love process will enjoy the job. People who enjoy meeting other people and networking and are more of an extrovertish personality, jobs like medical science liaisons, where you reach out to clinical investigators and have conversations on how do you get onto clinical trials, so on and so forth, are also opportunities for PhDs. So look at what you enjoy doing and then go out and seek those roles in these companies. You don't have to stick to the discipline that you got your PhD in. There are quite a few questions on should I pivot, should I not? Just take advantage of what's available and what fits your personality.
Yeah, I think that emphasizes the need to be flexible, especially if you move to industry in terms of what it is you should do. Don't limit yourself to the things that you know, because you have a scientific training, and the training itself provides you with the wherewithal to be able to analyze and understand problems that have some basis in science. You know, and it's not just companies. I don't think any of us have really brought up that there's this whole world, although I don't like this world, there's a whole world of consultants out there that you know, are in need of scientifically trained individuals, certainly on Wall Street, investment firms and whatnot also have large groups of scientists who worry about advising their investors on what to invest in, when to get in, when to get out. And you know, I know many people who've gone into these areas. I mean, one of the big surprises I always found when I first started doing investor relations conference meetings for Genentech Roche, the number of Yale like medical and PhD students that I would find who had just like became these high flying analysts was amazing. They'd come up, oh, I remember when you gave me this lecture and whatever, and it's this is what you did with your education. I remember at first being intense, but I think, in the end, these people did not necessarily do a bad thing.
But they write phenomenal theses on companies. And it's, I learn a lot from reading those analyst reports. I think it's a great point, Ira. I mean, even beyond biotech, the investment field and banks have a lot of opportunities for PhDs, and they have a lot of internship opportunities as well. While you're doing your PhD, if you want to get a sense for what it's like to be an analyst, certainly go apply for those positions. They're 3-month positions, internships, gives you a foot in the door, gives you a sense for what's going on. The other thing is, while we feel like investment here and there in biotech is drying up, there's a lot in terms of institutes like the Allen Brain Institute. There are these large I would say non-profit institutions that now have a lot of funding that you can also look to apply to. What are those larger companies like Altos Labs and what have you? I mean, there are a lot of these large startups, venture-based startups that have a huge appetite for students coming out of grad school that one should look at. So don't limit yourself to just the big pharma or the big biotechs.
Can I just comment on one thing concerning computation? I think computational work and having the ability to do that, even a minimal ability to do that, is a big advantage, so that you don't have to always bother somebody else to do the simplest kind of computational exercises that you may encounter. AI is an offshoot of that. And we're kind of, I think, in the middle of the passing of the AI bubble, because I think it's a phenomenal tool, and one will be able to do phenomenal things with it. But I don't think that artificial intelligence is ever in the near term in the biology space is going to fill in for actual intelligence. So when you say AI, you have to worry about what kind of AI you actually mean. So I think I'm not concerned about the future for biologists, because I think AI at the moment, as a generative discovery engine is probably overhyped. Or I'll say it's definitely overhyped.
Yeah. Just a quick comment on that. One of the conversations we have had, just within our team, is around trying to harness the potential of artificial intelligence to help with even writing. And one of the challenges is that you really do need to train those capabilities over time, and then retrain and then retrain and retrain. It's a big investment, even to get extrapolation from really well formatted data into something that even can be turned into text. So it's not quite the same as large language models, which can take all of the internet and turn it into something that seems reasonable. It's very different when you're talking about really well collected data. We need to have better tools to translate those data into meaningful outputs. So if people are interested in that world, I do believe there's going to be a continued effort in building those tools. And that may not be, and this is just a comment I wanted to share with this group and ask for your insights, it may not be in an actual drug developing company. It may be some of the supporting companies, things like CROs that will do, there was a question around a lab technician. And I said, well, there are entire CROs that work just on toxicity experiments. They have an enormous amount of work that needs to be done, and they need people who are great doing the technical work in the lab. So those are opportunities that exist. But that is a little different than where you might look at an individual company that's doing drug development. You would work on projects, you'd work on probably lots of different drugs, but they'd come through as projects over time. So that's another consideration you may want to think through. I wanted to come back to this topic that I think is probably weighing on a lot of the audience, which is that there seems to be this interest in making science no longer a major part of what the United States is. It seems that there's a real concern about this. And I wanted to ask all of your opinions on this question that seems to be bubbling below the surface of, is there something I can do to build my skill set to make me maybe resistant to a recession or resistant to the job market, being able to move around if I need to within these things and make myself more broadly interesting to potential employers. Can you all comment on that a bit?
Start here. I think, and I just answered one of those questions as well. It's not the job that you're doing is recession proof. I really think it's you who has to be recession proof. It's about you as the individual and how you show up to work and how you build your productivity index, so to speak. How productive are you? How easy is it for you to collaborate with others and show results to the company? If you can do those things, there will be an opportunity for you because you will have built your network around you. That network is critically important. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and the way we find our path is by figuring out who we know in this world and find a way to get there. Building your own network from day one. SITSI has a really great opportunity here at the annual forum where they have these round robins with PIs or industry academic folks and students to meet with. Take advantage of those opportunities, get to know people, connect with them, get to know people within the company, figure out how you can build your web, so to speak, of mentors, sponsors, and that's how you make yourself recession proof.
I don't know. I mean, I'm live long enough to be a little bit concerned whether you can make yourself recession proof. But one thing is absolutely certain: you need to have skills. The skills which define you as a professional. Remember, one of the most vulnerable positions is a manager's. Actually, when you go to the big company, the most difficult, most vulnerable position is VP, actually. And then senior directors. And the people who actually work at bench usually are not targeted during the different type of transition. So if you have a skills at that stage, if you expand it, of course, networking, all of this, what Priti said is absolutely correct. But you need to have something you can show to this company, to another company, to anybody who wants to know, and eventually your skills would be needed for someone else. And it's not only skills like doing experiment, putting the drops of microliters in the pipette, but also your thinking, your ability to solve the problems. And that's can come with the different flavors. Publications, because you're mostly, if you're academic inclined, or pipeline project which you can claim you contribute to. A lot of different things, but yeah, absolutely right. There's no, the person is potentially could be recession proof, not the company or not the position.
Yeah.
And the lower you are in the food chain, like you are just starting, then maybe better off you are.
Yeah, and I mean, what I mean by that is even if the, say, for example, an entire site gets laid off, which happens, if you have a network that you've built over the years, reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is what I've done, can you help me? That goes a long way. So just knowing people and building that network is important.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what I was going to say, what feeds into that is geographic location as well. So that if you look for at least insofar as biotech is concerned, the San Francisco Bay Area, Seattle, Boston, San Diego, to some extent Philadelphia area, are places where you find the largest concentrations of companies, which means it's easiest to network in those places, and it's also easiest to be able to find another position if yours or your company goes south, which will happen. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I've always been amazed by the resilience of the job market, even when it's bad. It may take longer, but people almost always wind up with jobs that are at least equivalent to what they had in fairly short order, meaning several months.
Thank you all. These answers and I think the context you've given everyone has been super helpful for the audience. At least it has been for me to hear the wisdom that you three have shared. I'm going to end on the last topic that I see in the questions, which is around the transition from being a researcher and trying to solve complicated scientific questions into someone who is a leader of other people. Could you all comment on how that transition has been for you? What are some of the things you've learned along the way? And what are some of the things you could share with the audience who might be interested in finding their way into leadership roles that might help them as they think about things they can show up, bring to work every day that'll help them get there?
Yeah, well, I'll give two parts very quickly to that. One is I remember the day that happened to me. It was in academia when I realized that I was needed by the people in the lab to advise them and not to do my own experiments. I realized that because I yelled at some grad student who came up crying about something not working while I was having trouble pouring a bunch of gradient gels, which that person could probably do 100 times better than me. And, I should have had her or somebody else do that part of it and whatever. But I just realized that was incredibly selfish. And so you reach a point kind of where you're more interested or realize that you can have a greater impact in helping others than in simply doing it yourself. And I think in science, to me, that's always defined the transition from transition into a more leadership role, taking that level of maturity and responsibility to know that your role in the process has changed. And you can take that basic transition and extrapolate it to almost anything else. If you feel you have the desire, the motivation and the need to expand what it is you do beyond that which you can do with your own two hands, you become a leader. And then you have to figure out how to do that. And generally it's a very delicate and complex mix of being able to tell a great story, but not overtell the story, setting a high bar for people, but not being a demanding, obnoxious lout. and having empathy, but not worrying too much about whether everybody in the world likes you. So all of these things have to be balanced, and you see so many people who've gone to the extreme on one side or the other, and they in the end they may rise for a while, but they will crash and burn. Mark my words. At any level.
Well said. Well said.
Any last comment, Dr. Hegde?
I think being a leader is a huge accountability and a responsibility on you. You're accountable for the people who report to you. So you have to be sure that whatever you're taking on has longevity and has legs so that their jobs are secure. I look at it as a big accountability, having an enterprise mindset and having exposure to strategies and how leaders put strategies together early in your career helps you transition and think beyond your program and your project, and really understanding how things fit in a puzzle in the larger scheme of things really helps you transition effectively from the bench to a leadership role.
That's a great ending. Thank you all. As we finish this, I'd just like to again voice my appreciation for this panel. You're all people I've looked up to in my career, and now I get to work with one of you, which is really nice. But you know, I'm sure that this audience is really thankful and appreciative of all the wisdom you've shared. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you to those who tuned in. If there are feedback, please feel free to share that with SITC. And we always love to improve these things as we go. So our goal is to help the members, especially the junior members, find a better path toward their goal career. So please share your feedback. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you on the next one.